The humidity in Mapo didn't just hang in the air. It felt like a wet shroud, smelling of roasted beans and the stagnant water of the Han River. Inside the bitter bean, Naomi wiped the counter with a rhythmic, aggressive precision. Every circular motion was a prayer to the god of small gains. Her natural hair was pulled back into a tight, elegant bun, a crown of resilience that defied the sweat trickling down her neck. She didn't look like a barista. She looked like a soldier guarding a bunker. The bell above the door didn't chime. It groaned, exhausted by the salt air. In walked a ghost from the high-rises. Kong Ho looked like a god who had been dragged through a gutter. His charcoal wool suit, hand-stitched in Milan, no doubt, was torn at the shoulder, a dark, viscous stain spreading across the lapel. His jawline was a blade, his eyes two cold embers of a dying fire. He didn't ask for help. He stood there, dripping blood onto Naomi's freshly mopped floor, expecting the world to tilt on its axis to accommodate him. "Out," Naomi said, her voice a low, melodic rasp. "We're closed for laundering." Kong Ho's gaze flickered to the closed sign, then back to her. "I am the son of GK Group. You require a bandage and a reality check," Naomi interrupted, stepping around the counter. She didn't offer a hand. She threw a bleach-stained gray rag at his chest. It hit the bloodstain with a wet thwack. "Use that to stop the leak. If you want to stay in this shop, you earn the square footage. The syndicate owns the lease. I own the air. You're currently breathing on credit." This was the seesaw. In the world of glass towers, Kong Ho could move markets with a whisper. Here, in the belly of Mapo, he was a liability. "My brother. He sent them," Kong Ho muttered, his stoic mask fracturing just enough to show the hollow terror beneath. "The succession. It started." "I don't care about your family tree, Prince. I care about my ledger," Naomi snapped. She saw the way his hands shook. He was a predator who had never been hunted before. "The Han Sang boys will be here in 20 minutes for the night's drop. If they find a GK heir in my back room, they won't kill you. They'll sell you back to your brother by the pound. And then they'll burn me for the trouble." Kong Ho looked at the rag in his hand, then at the apron hanging on the wall. It was a cheap polyester thing, stained with 3 years of failed dreams. "Give it to me," he said, his voice regaining that terrifying flat resonance of the elite. The rag? The apron. Naomi felt a cold shiver of disillusionment. She had hoped he would run. She had hoped the heir would be too proud to sink into the filth with her. But as he stripped off his ruined $4,000 jacket and tossed it into the trash can without a second glance, she realized he wasn't looking for a sanctuary. He was looking for a trench. For the next 6 hours, Naomi broke him. This was the ritual. She made him scrub the grease traps, the black gelatinous sludge that smelled of rotting milk and despair. She made him hand-grind beans until his soft executive palms blistered and bled. Every time he slowed down, she was there, a shadow in a white blouse and dark jeans, reminding him of his worthlessness. "Lower," she commanded, pointing to a spot on the floor. "The blood hasn't come up. If the syndicate sees GK blood on this floor, we both die. Scrub until you see your own failure in the tiles." Kong Ho didn't argue. That was the most frightening part. He took the humiliation like a drug, using the physical pain to drown out the fact that his father was likely dead, and his name was now a death warrant. By 4 a.m., the transformation was beginning. The prince was gone, replaced by a man with raw knuckles and a stained apron. But the power shift was coming. As the sun began to bleed over the horizon, a black sedan pulled up. 2 men in tracksuits, The Han Seng enforcers stepped out. Naomi's breath hitched. This was the moment of debt. She reached for the envelope of cash beneath the register. One of the men, a scarred veteran named Choi, didn't look at the money. He looked at the man in the back, mopping the floor. "Who's the new meat, Naomi? He looks expensive." Naomi opened her mouth to lie, but the words died in her throat. Her moral compass, the one that told her to protect the weak, was spinning wildly. Kong Ho didn't look up. He kept mopping. But he spoke, his voice vibrating through the floorboards. "Choi, tell your boss, Mr. Kim, that the accounts in the Cayman Islands under the Blue Swallow Shell Company have been flagged by the FSC. If I don't send a signal by noon, the funds freeze permanently." Choi froze. The air in the cafe turned to ice. Naomi looked at Kong Ho, then at the enforcers. She had thought she was the one in control. She had thought she was the master of this small, dark world. But Kong Ho hadn't been scrubbing the floor to hide. He had been waiting for his leverage to arrive. "How do you know that name?" Choi whispered, his hand going to the hilt of a knife at his belt. "I'm the one who set them up for you 3 years ago," Kong Ho said, finally looking up. His gaze was no longer that of a victim. It was the gaze of a man who owned the debt of everyone in the room. The enforcers didn't take the money. They backed out of the shop, their faces pale. Kong Ho turned back to Naomi. He handed her the mop. The seesaw had tilted. He was no longer the servant. "The floor is clean," he said softly. "What's next on the menu?" Naomi looked at her hands. They were trembling. She had lost the only power she had, her anonymity. By letting him stay, she had invited the inheritance into her house. And she knew, with a soul-crushing certainty, that she would never be clean again. The rain in Seoul turned the neon signs of Mapo into bleeding streaks of violet and gold. Inside the cafe, the air was thick with the scent of burnt sugar and the electric hum of Kong Ho's servers hidden in the basement. For 3 weeks, they had lived in a state of hypervigilance, a domesticity forged in a war zone. Kong Ho had become an expert at the machine, his movements fluid and efficient, a king masquerading as a commoner with terrifying ease. "You're staring," he said, not looking up from the latte art he was meticulously crafting, a perfect phoenix rising from the foam. "I'm wondering when the mask slips," Naomi replied, leaning against the industrial fridge. She looked exhausted. The dark circles under her eyes were the only jewelry she wore these days. "You're too good at this, Kong Ho. The humility, the service. It's a performance." "Everything is a performance, Naomi. Leadership is just theater with higher stakes." He set the cup down and finally looked at her. For a moment, the stoic wall crumbled. He reached out, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. The touch was electric, a spark in a room full of gasoline. "But this, the way you look at me when you think I'm not watching, that feels like the only honest thing left in this city." This was the false peak. Naomi let herself believe the lie. She leaned into his touch, her heart betraying her logic. They spent the night in the small loft above the shop, whispered promises of a life beyond the syndicate and the corporation filling the cramped space. He told her they would flee to Jeju, that he would let the inheritance burn. The punishment for her belief arrived at dawn. Naomi woke to find the bed cold. She walked downstairs to find Kong Ho standing by the window, his face illuminated by the blue light of a tablet. On the screen was a live feed of a warehouse. Her warehouse, the one where she kept the surplus supplies for her small business dreams. It was being raided by the National Tax Service. "What did you do?" she whispered. "I needed a distraction to move the GK Group's offshore ledgers," Kang Ho said, his voice devoid of the warmth from the night before. "I leaked the location of your warehouse as a suspected Han Seng front. The authorities are busy there, which gives my team the window they need to bypass the firewalls at the headquarters." "You sacrificed my business? My only legal asset?" Naomi's voice rose to a shriek. "I sacrificed a pawn to save the queen," he said, turning to her. The seesaw slammed down. He wasn't the lover from the loft. He was the strategist. "Your warehouse is gone, Naomi. Your clean record is smeared. You are now officially a person of interest. You can't leave me now. You have nowhere else to go." The forbidden closeness had been a tactical maneuver. He had waited for her to lower her guard so he could destroy her escape routes. She was no longer his partner. She was his captive, bound by the very legal ruin he had orchestrated. By the 4th chapter of their imprisonment, the cafe had become a tomb. The Han Seng syndicate, realizing that Kang Ho was using Naomi's shop as a tactical hub, stopped sending enforcers and started sending messages of a different kind. A box was left at the door. Inside was a single finger, wearing a ring Naomi recognized. It belonged to the old man who ran the pharmacy next door, the one who had given her free medicine when she was sick. "The trial has moved to the streets," Kang Ho noted, looking at the box with a clinical detachment that made Naomi's skin crawl. "They are targeting everyone you've ever spoken to. They want to smoke us out." "This is on you!" Naomi screamed, throwing a ceramic mug at his head. He didn't flinch as it shattered against the wall behind him. "Your inheritance is a plague. People are dying because you're hiding behind my apron." "Then pay the debt, Naomi," he challenged, stepping toward her, his build looming over her in the cramped kitchen. "If you want the killing to stop, hand me over. Call my brother. Tell him I'm here. You'll get a reward. You might even get your warehouse back." The core engine hummed with tension. Naomi picked up her phone, her fingers hovering over the emergency line. She looked at Kang Ho, his sharp jawline, his piercing gaze, the man who had ruined her life and then offered her the blade to end his. She couldn't do it. Emotional attachment was her cage. She dropped the phone, sobbing. "That's what I thought," he whispered, pulling her into a cold embrace. "You've developed a taste for the darkness, haven't you? You'd rather be a queen in a graveyard than a barista in a cubicle." The night took a bloodier turn when the shop was breached. 2 assassins from the Silent Hand faction broke through the roof. The quiet tension exploded into a frantic, ugly struggle. Naomi didn't hide. She used the heavy industrial espresso tamper to crush the windpipe of a man trying to garrote Kang Ho. She felt the life leave him. She felt the hot spray of blood on her white blouse. The power shift. Kang Ho stood over the bodies, looking at Naomi with a terrifying pride. She had officially crossed the line. She wasn't an innocent bystander anymore. She was an accomplice. He handed her a cloth to wipe the blood from her face. "Now," he said, "you're ready to meet my grandmother." The Queen Dowager of the GK Group didn't arrive in a motorcade. She arrived in a single, nondescript black car, an elderly woman in a handbook that cost more than Naomi's entire life. She sat at a small table in the center of the bitter bean, the smell of death from the night before still lingering beneath the scent of fresh coffee. "So," the Dowager said, her eyes scanning Naomi with the cold precision of a diamond merchant. This is the black pearl my grandson has been hiding behind. I am the owner of this shop, Naomi said, her voice trembling but her gaze fixed. And your grandson is an employee who has overstayed his welcome. The old woman laughed, a dry, rattling sound. He is not an employee. He is a poisoned crown. And you, my dear, are the antidote. Or the sacrifice. The dowager laid out the deal. Kang Ho would be allowed to return to the board and claim his inheritance, but only if he cleaned his reputation. He needed a scapegoat for the crimes committed during the coup. My grandson tells me you have no legal standing anymore, the dowager continued, sipping the coffee Naomi had been forced to brew. No warehouse, no clean record. A history of laundering for the Han Seng. If you confess to being the mastermind who seduced and manipulated the young heir, we will ensure your brother receives the best care in Switzerland. For life. Naomi looked at Kang Ho. He stood by the window, his back to her. He didn't defend her. He didn't speak. And if I refuse? Naomi asked. Then the Han Seng will be allowed to finish what they started, the dowager replied. And your brother will be the first to pay the price for your pride. This was the disillusionment. Naomi realized that Kang Ho had known this offer was coming. He had orchestrated her ruin in Chapter 3 specifically to make this the only viable option. He didn't want a partner. He wanted a martyr. The irreversible loss. Naomi signed the confession. As she put the pen down, Kang Ho finally turned around. There was no remorse in his eyes, only the cold satisfaction of a man who had won his trial. He walked over and took the paper. Thank you, Naomi, he said. I'll make sure they remember you. They won't remember me at all, she said, her voice dead. You've erased me. You've taken everything I was and turned it into a footnote in your biography. Power had changed hands for the final time in the shop. The dowager rose. Kang Ho took his place at her side. And Naomi was left standing in her ruined cafe, waiting for the police to arrive and take her to a cell that Kang Ho had built for her with his own hands. The confession was the match. The fire was merely a formality. After the Queen Dowager departed, the air in the shop became stagnant, the scent of expensive perfume clashing with the metallic tang of the blood Naomi had spilled to save a man who had already sold her. Kang Ho stood by the espresso machine, his hands, now clean of grease, adjusting his cuffs. He looked like the ruler he was born to be, the coffee prince's skin discarded like a seasonal coat. The police will be here in an hour, he said, his voice a flat line. The Han Seng will attempt to intercept the transport. I've arranged for a fire to break out during the chaos. You'll be moved to a black site. To the world, Naomi, you will be a casualty of the Mapo underworld. A casualty, Naomi repeated. She looked at the walls of the bitter bean. She saw the smudge on the doorframe where she'd measured her height when she first arrived in Seoul, brimming with hope. She saw the dent in the counter from a night they'd laughed together. You're burning my history to save your future. I'm preserving you, he countered, though his eyes remained fixed on the horizon. The irreversible loss began at 2 a.m. The shop didn't just burn. It was liquidated. Men in tactical gear, Kang Ho's private security, moved in with accelerant. Naomi watched as the coffee beans she'd roasted herself were soaked in gasoline. The smell was pungent, an olfactory funeral. As the first flame took hold, the Hun Seng arrived. The street erupted into a trial of lead and glass. Naomi was shoved into the back of an armored SUV. Through the tinted window, she watched her life's work dissolve into a pillar of orange flame. The ledgers, the photos of her family, her legal identity, all of it turned to ash. For the first time, Kang Ho didn't look back. He was already on his phone, barking orders to the GK board of directors. Naomi realized the seesaw was broken. He had reached the false peak and jumped off, leaving her in the wreckage. She wasn't a partner anymore. She was a ghost in the making. 3 months later, the gray zone of Mapo was a construction site. The GK group had moved with predatory speed, utilizing the confession Naomi had signed to seize the land under emergency redevelopment laws. Naomi lived in a luxury penthouse in the Gangnam district, a gilded cage with no windows that opened. She was dressed in couture, her natural hair styled by professionals, but her expressive eyes had become 2 shards of obsidian. This was the substitution. Kang Ho had substituted her freedom for safety, and her identity for his comfort. Kang Ho was now the chairman. He had purged his brother and sidelined his grandmother. He visited her every night at 11 p.m. He would bring her a cup of coffee from a high-end machine, but it never tasted right. "The board has approved the final merger," he said, sitting across from her. He looked older, his handsome features sharpened by the weight of the poisoned crown. "We own the Mapo district now. I've set up a foundation in your name. Your old name." "You use my name like a tax write-off," Naomi said, her voice devoid of its former wit. "Do you know what they call me in the news? The Siren of Mapo. The woman who corrupted the young heir. You let them paint me as a villain so you could be the survivor." "It was the only way to keep the shareholders from demanding your head," he replied, reaching for her hand. Naomi pulled away. This was the final punishment of emotional attachment. She didn't hate him with fire. She hated him with the cold, pressurized silence of the deep sea. She realized he didn't visit her because he loved her. He visited her because she was the only person alive who knew he was a monster. She was his mirror, and he was addicted to the reflection. "I want to see my brother," she demanded. "He's in Switzerland. He's walking again," Kang Ho lied. He didn't tell her that the care provided by the GK group included a permanent sedative to keep the boy from asking questions about his missing sister. The finale took place on the anniversary of the fire. Kang Ho took Naomi to the grand opening of the GK Plaza, the massive glass and steel monolith built directly on top of where the bitter bean once stood. He wanted her there to see his triumph. He thought he had successfully rewritten the narrative. He was the hero who overcame a dark influence to lead Korea into a new era. As they stood on the VIP balcony overlooking the shimmering city, Naomi looked down at the spot where her counter used to be. The core engine of inheritance had won. Power had changed hands from the street to the tower, and she had been the currency used for the transaction. "Are you happy?" Kang Ho asked, standing behind her. He placed his hands on her shoulders. "I don't exist, Kang Ho," she said softly. "You can't ask a ghost if it's happy." The final transformation. Erasure. Naomi didn't try to kill him. She didn't try to run. Instead, she took the siren persona he had created for her and weaponized it. In front of the cameras, she didn't play the part of the redeemed lover. She whispered a single sentence into the microphone of a live newsfeed before his security could cut her off. The coffee was always bitter, because it was brewed with the blood of the Mapo tenants. It wasn't a revolution, but it was a crack in the glass. The security dragged her away. Kang Ho's face remained stoic, but his grip on the balcony railing tightened until his knuckles turned white. He had built a world around her to keep her silent, and in 1 second, she had reminded him that he could never truly own what he had destroyed. Naomi is seen being driven away in a black car, headed for a sanatorium from which she will never return. Kang Ho stands alone in his office, drinking a cup of coffee. He takes a sip and grimaces. It's cold. The world sees a king. The king sees a man who served coffee beside a woman he loved, only to realize he had traded her for a crown that tasted like ash. Emotional attachment was punished. Power was visibly changed. The coffee shop was gone.